Konnichiwa. Today we're going to talk about an unusual but not uncommon element of Japanese that you'll certainly come across in your immersion. It can be confusing because nobody really explains exactly what it is and what it does, and of course certainly don't explain why. A number of people have asked me about this recently, including my red Kokeshi patron, Bob Nagler, who says, "Have you ever done a video of verb plus my? I've not found a very useful explanation anywhere, only lists with examples and translation, which give somewhat of an idea." Well, yes, that is pretty much the state of play. So let's do the video now. My is a negative helper, like z and n, which I did a video on quite recently, and like them, it's something of a fossil, one of those elements that's not quite at home in modern Japanese, but it's used quite a lot, so we need to understand it. The first unusual thing about it is that unlike most helpers, it doesn't attach to one of the verb stems. It gets stuck straight onto the end of the verb in most cases. So if we want to push it onto iku, we just say ikumai. This is always the case with go-down verbs because there's no other way of attaching mai. With ichidan verbs, we can attach it to the universal ichidan stem. As you know, with ichidan verbs, we always, whatever we're doing with them, we always just take off the ru and put on whatever we want to put on. So, for example, miru can become mimai, but just as often it's mirumai. If the two irregulars kuru and suru, they can be kurumai and surumai, but they can also be komai and shimai. Now, strictly speaking, certainly in the past, using ichidan verbs in their entirety with mai on the end was probably ungrammatical, but now it's so widely done that it's generally accepted. You'll see it everywhere on the television news or anywhere. So what is this mai? Well, it's really a sort of sister to the helper adjective nai, which is the negativizing adjective. What's the difference between mai and nai, apart from the way it attaches? Well, what mai actually is the volitional form. Now, adjectives don't usually have volitional forms, but in this case we do, and it has certain uses. Like nai, mai is an adjective, but unlike nai, and just about every other adjective, it doesn't morph in any way. You don't say makute or makata. You only ever use it in its simple, unchanged form, mai, so it is, in a way, a static element in Japanese, not an active element. And this actually is quite natural, because it's the same with the positive volitional, isn't it? We have their forms and past forms of helpers like the receptive and the causative, and of course nai itself, but we don't have past and te forms, etc. of the volitional. Tabeyo. You don't put that into the past, it doesn't have a te form because that doesn't really make any sense with a volitional. So what does a negative volitional actually do? It doesn't do all the things that a positive volitional does. You can't use it as a call to action. Ikimashou, let's go. You can't say ikumai, let's not go. Doesn't mean that. You can't use it for, as I've shown in another video, forming a construction that means try to do something. So you can't use mai in let's try not to do type constructions. Its uses are pretty limited. It has a couple of direct uses and then a couple of other uses which are really quite useful. So let's look at them. Its most usual use by a long way is saying that something is unlikely. It's a volitional negative. So just in the same way that we can voice conjectures or assessments, and this is very often used with the verb aru. So we say arumai. Sonna koto wa arumai. That's just not likely. I don't think such a thing is probable at all. But it works just the same with any other verb. Kono furi de wa kare wa komai. In this downpour, I doubt if he'll come. And this is rather related to the other adjectives of subjectivity that we've discussed elsewhere, and I'll put a link for that. such as hoshi, which represents our desire for something, or kawaii, which represents our fear of something. As usual, these adjectives are pointed at the thing that we desire, that we fear, etc. And in this case, they're pointed at the thing that we consider unlikely. It represents really our subjectivity about the likelihood of something. If we want to give an exact Japanese equivalent, arumai is directly equivalent to nai daro, doesn't exist, I conjecture, or nai desho, and dewa arumai is directly equivalent to dewa nai daro, dewa nai desho, janai daro, janai desho. In other words, A isn't B, I would conjecture it seems likely, etc. And the interesting point here is that, as we see, with this conjectural use of the volitional in its positive, more usual form, we don't attach the volitional directly to the verb that we're conjecturing about. So we don't say, Sakura wa sugu ni kaero. That doesn't mean Sakura will probably come. We say, Sakura wa sugu ni kuru desho, or daro, because that's the way we do it. We do it with the volitional copula when we're making that kind of conjecture. But with mai, we can attach it directly to the verb, as we did in the previous examples. Sonna koto wa aru mai is directly equivalent to sonna koto wa nai desho. And there's no room for ambiguity here, because mai has a more limited range of meanings, as we've just discussed, than the positive volitional has. So we're not going to get confused with, say, a call to action, because mai doesn't do calls to inaction. So the most common use of mai is as the negative adjectival of these desho, dero, conjectural constructions. However, it is also used for one other negativizing structure that is directly equivalent to the positive. So we can say, nidoto iku mai, I won't go there again. Literally, I won't go a second time. So that's the other common meaning. When it's not expressing a likelihood or possibility, it's expressing a strong decision or determination not to do something. Now, beyond these two uses, there are also a couple of other common constructions in which mai is used, and you're pretty much certain to hear these. One uses the positive and negative volitional forms together, meaning whether the verb is done or not. So, for example, iko ka, ikumai ka means whether I go or not. Now, this is very similar to the construction that we've talked about before and that you probably know already, iku kado ka, which means literally whether I go or how, which in more natural English would be whether I go or what. Now, the other construction that you'll commonly hear is formed by simply attaching shi, which is used for listing causes of something, but as we've discussed elsewhere, it's often used on its own just to imply a continuing list. And this gives a construction that's somewhat comparable to the it isn't as if or it isn't like construction in English. So if we say, kanimochi dewa arumaishi, which is roughly equivalent to saying in English, it's not as if we're rich, or sekai ga owaru wake ga arumaishi, it's not as if the world is going to end. That's how we put it in English. In Japanese, it's more like saying, it isn't that we're rich or something like that. That's the shi, that's something like that. And the volitional is again marking a negative hypothetical. Someone might act as if the world were going to end, but in fact it probably isn't. We might look to some people as if we're rich, but, well, we don't seem to be, do we? So this is how the mai helper works in its various different common uses. If you've seen any other uses and would like to discuss them, please put it in the comments below. And if you'd like me to talk about any other elements of Japanese that you find confusing, please put that in the comments below as well. And of course, if you have any general comments or questions, those go in the same place. I'd like to thank my gold Kokeshi patrons, my producer angels who make these videos possible, and all my producer angels, my red Kokeshis, my blue Kokeshis, my pink Kokeshis. Thank you, all of you. and everyone who supports this channel in various ways, watching, liking, subscribing, and most important of all, learning from the channel, and perhaps sharing it with friends and others who are learning Japanese. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします。Class dismissed.